Your liver is unique in that, and this might be why it's such a good system for regeneration. Liver cells are hepatocytes. They are doing the liver cell job. And then they can divide while they're doing that job and make two liver cells that are doing that job. Normally, when cells divide, they look more embryonic-like, and they're not doing that job. You can give 60% of your liver away, and your body will respond, and your liver that you have left will grow and restore the physiological function of the original liver.
And that's actually a good segue to my next question about, so your liver grows to a certain size and the cells are kind of organized in a way where they have a place and they know where they're supposed to be, and they don't get bigger than that. And so somehow they're communicating to each other to fit this structure and this certain size. And I guess you can manipulate it in some ways, like you talked about with the orthodontics, you can move things around, but there's still a trail and they still kind of know where things are and where they want to be.
Yep.
So can you explain like how the cells kind of signal to each other and know where they're supposed to be?
That's a $6 million question, isn't it? One thing we know is that cells talk to each other by their cell surfaces. So if we take cells from a chicken embryo and we disassociate those cells and we put them in a petri dish, those cells will divide and they'll create a one-layer confluent layer of cells. And once everybody is touching the edges and each other, they stop dividing. And we really don't know why. You can take muscle cells and nerve cells, put them in a petri dish, and the muscle cells will go this way and the nerve cells will go that way, especially if you exert an electrical current across the field. It seems to enhance the likelihood of a neuron hooking into a muscle cell. For example, why do the lungs stop growing? And then with physiology, why and growth of the individual, why do those lobes enlarge as we grow and reach adulthood? I don't think folks really know. We do know that with stress, the heart can enlarge. With exercise, the heart can enlarge. And those are very, very different things. So in response to demand, an organ may become larger. I've heard that if you give one kidney away, the other one will grow a little bit to compensate. So there is this feedback of physiological need, homeostasis, what does my body need, and what is it missing, and the development of cells. A good example is giving a pint of blood. So you go and you give a pint of blood. And your body's like, wait a second, I need a little bit more oxygen up in this brain. So the hearts may beat a little faster for a little bit. You may have to take in more nutrients. And the reserve blood cells in your bone marrow, your spleen, and your liver are all going to go like out into the body system. So you've used your reserve, and what stimulates you to make more blood cells is the need, the homeostatic need. Some folks have a disease called polycythemia, and that's a cancer of the blood, the red blood cells. And so polycythemia, they make too many red blood cells. Those individuals actually have to go to the doctors and be bled so that so their blood isn't so thick that it's not difficult to pump, and they don't clot unnecessarily. And so it's this, what regulates growth, what regulates enlargement, what regulates the creation of more red blood cells. It's all this homeostatic negative feedback loop of, I need a little bit more oxygen, I'm going to make a few more red blood cells. This happens when folks fly into Denver. All right, so they fly into Denver and they go to the Mile High City, and all of a sudden the air is much thinner. And so for the first 2 or 3 days, they may have heart palpitations. They may have trouble falling asleep at night. Their heart may race. They may get winded walking up a set of stairs that they'd never have trouble walking up in Illinois or Massachusetts. And then after 3 or 4 days, everything's pretty much okay. That's because their spleen and their bone marrow and their liver have basically shot out every reserve red blood cell they had, and their body's starting to make more. And this involves communication between the kidney and the bloodstream. The kidney senses oxygen levels. I know that seems kind of weird because you think about the lungs and the heart and the brain thinking about oxygen. But the kidney senses oxygen levels, and if the oxygen levels are not high enough, it releases a chemical called erythropoietin into the bloodstream, and that jazzes up all the stem cells to make more red blood cells. And it takes about 3 or 4 days. This is also why athletes sometimes visit or exercise in hyperbaric pressure chambers where they can be exposed to low levels of oxygen to stimulate synthesis of red blood cells.
What I understand from you telling me then, it's not this like top-down approach command. I don't know if your brain would be saying it's not your brain telling your body to react in this way. It's your cells that are kind of reacting to stimulus from, lack of oxygen, stress here, whatever's going on. Your individual cells kind of have the instructions and act almost autonomously then.
Well,
Is that
all right.
right?
So there's a whole nother nervous system we're not talking about. All right, so we've got the brain controlling the show. But what really controls this homeostasis is something called the autonomic nervous system. And there are 2 branches of the autonomic nervous system: the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. And so these things happen without your brain being involved. So the sympathetic nervous system is sometimes referred to as the fight or flight system. So you're driving your car down the highway and there's a semi in front of you, and you decide, I'm going to go around this thing, and you go to the left and there's another semi coming right at you, and you have this adrenaline rush, and you bring your car back behind the semi, and you don't die, which is good. Fight or flight, adrenaline, noradrenaline, release of adrenaline from the adrenal glands on top of your kidneys. The parasympathetic nervous system is often referred to as the rest and digest nervous system. That's the one that helps you digest your food, reduces your heart rate, respiration rate. So sympathetic's going to start that heart rate going, increase your respiration rate, get like oxygen, nutrients, things moving fast into your bloodstream. And so it's really the mix of sympathetic and parasympathetic innervation, as well as the hormones, adrenaline in this case, or other hormones that say, okay, it's time to sleep, it's time to rest, it's time to digest, it's time to run away from the bear that's going to try and kill you. And so the cells in your body are responsive to the signals from these 2 elements of the nervous system, as well as to the hormones that are circulating in your blood. Say a woman becomes pregnant and she starts to produce the hormones of pregnancy. One of the very first indicators that there's a change, besides the lack of menstrual flow, is that her breasts become tender and they grow. And that's all hormonal. And the breast tissues enlarge and they differentiate. And in 6, 7, 8 months, they're starting to produce milk. And once the baby is weaned, there's no call for that milk. The tissues resorb. They go back to their quiescent state. And that's another level of homeostasis. So once you've produced milk and you've fed a kid, you don't do it for the rest of your life. So the body tissues can cycle in some cases through periods of activity and periods of quiescence. This is also why I think they were so lucky in getting the first mammalian clone, which is Dolly the sheep. And Dolly the sheep was named Dolly because they actually took a mammary cell to clone into an enucleated egg to make Dolly. And I often wonder, I'm sure they tried every other cell in the body they could get their hands on, but the fact that mammary tissue cycles into activity and then quiescence and can be reactivated with another pregnancy over and over and over again, probably demonstrates some sort of DNA plasticity that allowed that to happen.
Basically, you're describing your cells respond mostly to chemical signals
In
and
contact.
contact with each
Well,
other.
and contact with each other, and so they're basically sensing their environment all the time.
Yeah.
They're getting chemical signals. They're in need of oxygen and nutrients and wastes. They're connected to their neighbors. If they're in epithelia, they're very tightly connected. And so they're aware, they're sensing their environment all the time.
And they have some sort of internal instructions that know how to react to its environment then.
Seems, I mean, I never really thought about it that way, but I guess I just accept the fact that my heart muscle cells know to contract with their other neighbor heart muscle cells and repair. So with repair, so for example, I think about the respiratory epithelium that lines your larynx, your voice box, and your trachea. If you over traumatize the respiratory cilia in the respiratory tract with smoking or heavy chemicals in the air, the body responds to that by changing what the cells look like and making them more skin-like, making them stratified and squamous-like. So they don't move the mucus because they don't have cilia, and you get these patches of multiple layered cells that are trying to protect your respiratory tract in another way, but they don't function the same way, which is not a good thing. It's your body's last effort to try and protect you. Just as if you play an instrument or you rake in the garden and you use your hands a lot, you develop calluses in athletics or whatever. Your skin will actually get thicker and heavier in order to protect you. In some ways, you can imagine the lining of the trachea, the tube that goes to your bronchi and your lungs, gets so irritated that it actually thickens and becomes a flatter squamous epithelium like your skin.
Yeah, so with those calluses, then they have some time delay to respond to basically being stressed out, and somehow they know it's not like your brain telling you, okay, we need to be stronger here. It's them responding to something.
They're
And then
responding to mechanical stimulation. Yep.
And then as you stop that, they'll slowly disappear and get back to this homeostasis.
Although I think for some individuals, I can tell when I take bloods for my students, when we test their blood types and such, even though I'm wearing gloves, when I touch their hands, I know if they do something stressful with their digits because of just the feeling of their skin. And I wonder if once you've really used your hands heavily for your whole life, if they ever really go back to being sort of super baby, thin, soft. I don't know.
Your body's always balancing too, I guess. It's not optimized for everything. Of course, it can't optimize for everything. So there's trade-offs for all these things. Your body's not just like, we're going to be awesome at everything. Often, I guess it's nutrition, calorie, or nutrient balance, but there's probably other things where you're balancing functionality of different organs against each other, and that's probably important for healing as well. And just
a good portion of this is regulated by negative feedback loops, so we don't sort of spiral out of control. I think about heart rate, blood pressure. If your heart's beating too hard, there are sensors in the aortic arch that are like, well, hey, this is too much. And that actually allows the parasympathetic nervous system to quiet the heart. And so these feedback loops are there to try and keep everything in a sort of an even playing field. There are very few positive feedback loops, one being birth. So basically, woman's in labor, the muscles contract. They don't relax all the way out. They contract, then there's a pause, and then they contract, and then there's a pause, and then they contract again. So they contract until they get that baby out. but there are very few positive feedback loops because things would just spiral out of control.